Hello and welcome to the Special Response Diver Podcast. I'm Jordan Harvell, your host, and I'm so excited that you're here joining us for another episode of the Special Response Diver Podcast. Just want to remind you, this is all brought to you by Special Response Diving International, where we know the challenges public safety divers face underwater. So that's why we've created training and resources that can help them in any scenario they encounter so that every dive is safe and successful. Well, today I'm super excited because we have the one and only Michael W. Gast joining us here on the podcast. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much for coming here and giving of your time to share with us a little history lesson today. We've got to figure out where all this thing called public safety diving came from, where it all started.
Well, it all started basically in 1958.
It's a long time ago.
Long time ago. When you tie things to that, 1958 is also when the episodes of Sea Hunt came on.
I love that show.
And Sea Hunt,
Mike Nelson.
Mike Nelson, Lloyd Bridges played Mike Nelson, who was a former Navy diver during the Korean War, and afterwards took on public safety type jobs and solved them all.
Yes, of course. Well, he was heroic. So,
but he just basically used his diving skills that he learned in the Navy and applied them to the function of law enforcement, to the function of recovery, to the function of rescue, all of those things which weren't really in the diving skills of a Navy diver.
Right. So he and I do remember from that show that while he was a great at assisting all of the law enforcement side of things, some of the things he did, you look back now as a regular scuba diver, you're like, that he should be dead.
Oh yeah,
His safe ascent rate was not so safe.
Anytime you go faster than your bubbles, you're not in a safe ascent rate.
That was a very I think it's more entertaining to watch that show now, based just from the viewpoint of how not to dive. But it was great. I remember watching those and still have some of them on DVD. But
they're excellent. They're excellent. I use them in training. This is what you should do. This is really what you shouldn't do.
Exactly.
But the end result is, why did you do what you did to accomplish what you needed to accomplish? And that's the whole purpose of a public safety diver, of a special response diver.
Yeah.
They got to be able to get in the water and do what needs to be done, not sit around trying to figure out, well, how do we do this? And how they have to have the training, the skills, the abilities, the knowledge. It's all the KSAs, knowledge, skills, and attitude. Knowledge, skills, and ability.
Yeah.
Okay? And they got to have that going in, not coming out and fumbling around.
Now, this all goes back, you said, to 1958, and, it started with a Z. It started with Edwin Blaze Zender.
What a name.
Which is one of the coolest names ever.
What a cool name. It's like he was blazing the trail of public safety diving. Special response diving, he in fact was. He was the father of police diving, public safety diving, special response diving, no matter what you want to call it. He was trained in the Navy. Mm-hmm. When he came out of the Navy in 1958, he got on with the Dade County Sheriff's Department, which a year later became the Dade County Public Safety Department.
Okay.
And he was given the responsibility of heading up the dive search and recovery team.
Okay, now I know the story, but you're sharing it here for everybody because of your connection with him. But before he got into that, there was actually something happened with him, right? That he got injured.
Yeah, after serving in the Navy for 10 years as a heavy salvage diver and a surface swimmer, he got on with the Dade County Public Safety Department, and within a year, he was hospitalized with his partner who had pulled some kid out of a car. And in administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation,
The car went in the water.
Yeah, the car went into the water, pulled the kid out, administered mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and both of them ended up with spinal meningitis.
Oy.
And both of them were in the hospital. The younger guy, he was scared to death of needles. Mm-hmm. So they treated him, but you ended up having to get shots in the abdomen for this.
Right.
And Zender, he was a crusty old Navy guy, so he took them. Well, the other guy died.
Oh, my gosh.
The other guy died from spinal meningitis. And Zender had contracted it, and he got the shots, got the treatment, and while in the hospital, he ended up losing 90% of his hearing. He had 10% hearing in one ear.
Wow.
And so the commander of the special section in which the dive rescue team or dive recovery team existed contacted him and asked him if he could put together a resource manual for training. And Ed Zender, during this time, while he's hospitalized, actually started with his 8th grade education. He got his GED in the Navy, but with his 8th grade education, he actually wrote his own manual, drew his own pictures, and created really the first public safety diving training manual.
In 1958.
In 1958, 1959, yeah.
Okay. And from there, that's where he started just kind of taking all these skills and abilities and saying, all right, here's how we apply them to the law enforcement side, specifically with the police department and doing recoveries. And where did it go from there? I mean,
well, you've got to remember that up until 1958, 1959, there were no police dive teams or fire dive teams. There were people trained. You know,
but they were all Navy divers. They were all trained.
They were all either military divers or they got trained by military divers.
Right.
But how do you train someone to do a crime scene underwater? How do you train someone to do a recovery? How do you train, you know?
You're figuring it out as you go.
That's what Zender felt like, this is what needs to be done. From the daily activity of the dive team, he was able to start putting together, here's how you do a area search. This is how you search under a marina for a lost victim. Here's how you recover a boat. Here's how you recover a car.
Right.
I mean, cars. But up until 1958, there were no police dive teams or fire rescue dive teams. There were commercial divers that were hired when they needed something recovered. But a commercial diver, what does he know about preserving evidence? What does he know about chain of command or anything like that?
So he really was kind of, you know, in all pun intended, blazing this trail.
He was blazing a new trail for this. This is what happened. And there were really famous cases that I can expound upon at a later date, but cases in which you learn from step-by-step exposure of doing, how do you find this? We're looking for a gun right now. How do we find this in 3 inches of silt?
Right.
You know, we're looking for a body of someone that fell into the water under a bridge and drowned. How do you find him?
Right. And no one had ever done it because it was you could fumble around as a surface supplied commercial diver, which is what a lot of these people were.
That's correct.
They were hard hat divers.
They were hard hat divers from the surface. They would walk on the bottom and just kind of like, okay, whatever we see.
Right.
Ed's the one that came up with, you know, you got to get into the silt. You got to. I mean, a weapon is going to sink under the silt.
Right.
A part of it may stick out, but it's going to be underneath the silt. You can't just go looking and, well, there's nothing down here.
Sure.
Drownings. What are the dynamics of a body going down? Zender was very involved with the medical examiner and asking about, you know, how do you do this and why does the body sink and how fast does it sink and how deep will it go and how fast will it come back up? All those things were unknowns. And Zender started putting together this information. Underwater photography was very, 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 very crude at the time.
Right.
You know, what you can do out of the water and what you can do in the water is two totally different things. A flash underwater only goes 2 or 3 feet.
Right.
If it goes that far.
Right.
And
it
the
was
same
even
flash
weaker.
is good for 30 or 40 feet out of the water.
And it was weak back then, at best. Because
at best.
The
And
battery
so
power
taking
and the light
pictures, you end
bulbs
up with a
and
black picture.
Exactly.
But there's a lot. And Zender, with his 8th grade education, ended up with a hearing disability. His badge number was 100, by the way. And so whenever officers would come and ask a question, he just assumed they were asking how deep was the water. And so he, about 100. No, I'm sorry. He got that turned around. They would ask for his ID number, but they were asking about depth.
Oh, okay.
And he'd always do that. So all the things were always about 100.
So that makes sense.
About 100.
Why I've been on these canals and people say, how deep is it? And I'll ask them and they're like 60, 70 feet. He messed it up for me. Okay. These canals are like 12 feet deep.
Yeah, 12, 13 feet deep.
No, they're 100.
But that's how he talked. About 100.
That's how he
talks. I'm 100. Badge number 100. So, no, Zender was an interesting character, but he had a desire. He had a desire to take the skills and knowledge and abilities, his attitude, to other divers.
Yeah.
And he started training the Miami-Dade, which was then the Dade County Public Safety Department. They were their rescue team.
Right.
They did all rescues, including water rescues and what have you. And he was the first one to come up with the fact, we gotta get rid of this rescue term. Rescue. You can't do dive rescue. Diving rescue don't exist.
Yeah.
Unless you're on the scene,
right.
when whatever happens, within 2 or 3 minutes, 5 minutes, okay, it's not a rescue anymore. It's a recovery. Okay, and that's where the term rescue sells things.
Yeah.
People are thinking, wow.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that.
And but it's underwater search and recovery.
Yeah.
That's the basic purpose of a public safety diver.
Now, there's him coming up through the 60s really and starting to just say, all right, let me figure this thing out, everything underwater as it relates to recoveries and crime scenes and that kind of thing. And then we get into the 70s where, and now we're just kind of going through the generations of leaders of public safety diving training. You come into the police department, Miami-Dade County Police Department, in 1974. But you were patrol, like you didn't just come straight onto the dive.
Police officer, yeah.
Dive team. When did you come onto the dive team with Zinder?
In 1981,
Okay.
1982.
And there you started, and you weren't like coming from a bunch of scuba diving experience. You learned there, and that was your life. Like,
well, watching, I would come to the scenes of the divers when they were doing their things, and I would have a chance to talk to Zinder,
okay,
which he was always hard to talk to because he couldn't hear,
right,
and just get little tidbits. But I was on Marine Patrol before I went to the divers,
okay,
for about 18 months, and during that time is when I started honing my skills diving. We would do prop changes. We would do zinc changes. We would clean the hull of the boat. We would have things fall over. How would you set up to find a pair of pliers or
right.
something in the water and the silt and everything? And those things developed from what Zinder had shared with me, and then being able to develop them even further, and then checking back with Zinder. But then
right.
when I got on the dive team, Zinder was my instructor.
Okay.
Zinder was my sensei.
Right.
And I was his Padawan. And for 7 years, I dove with Zinder and the 4 other divers. But Zinder was the wealth of information. And I've got to give a little pick here for Joe Johnson. Joe Johnson, he came on the dive team in 1961.
Okay.
Good information. The problem was he just really didn't want to get in the water if he didn't have to get in the water.
Yeah. He knew what he was doing, but
Yep.
if he can get somebody else to do it too.
It's scary down there.
Yeah. Well, those things that it's only scary when they the body grabs you back.
That's correct. That's correct. That was a big thing Zinder used to always say. He says, you never, ever find a body underwater. It finds you.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Every time. Well, you've spent this time, coming up into kind of your own in the dive world. Now, you're the founder of Special Response Diving International. It originally founded as the National Academy of Police Diving, and your vision for that came from Zinder and the need for that. And how did that transition go from like, okay, Zinder has this heart for sharing this with other public safety divers, but that sparked in him in a unique way, and then you taking that and saying, we can actually do something with this.
Yeah, Zinder came to me about 3 or 4 years in. Mm-hmm. And Mike, you got a college education, and you're going to become a dive instructor, and maybe we can push this thing further so that somebody that knows what they're doing, not someone. This was Zinder's big thing. There was another individual on the dive team that was already an instructor with a big organization, and he just disdained Zinder. Like, I'm a dive instructor. You're just a Navy diver that came and started doing it in department.
Right.
And I still remember the story where Zinder brought all his dives historically.
Like logged dives,
everything, reports and everything, and he slammed them on his desk. That's my background, and that's why I'm leading this dive team and teaching search and recovery.
It still
never heard a problem from this individual again.
Still blows my mind how people still think that the certification means more than the experience.
Absolutely. And that's the pitfall of what's happening. I remember going through a course that was touted as like the best course. When for 3 days, the last 2 days, I was teaching the course. Because I would ask a question,
did they
and the
get your money
instructor
back?
would be, well, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
I said, well, here's how we do this.
Right.
And then he actually asked me, he says, well, on these next 2 days, can you kind of jump in and be the instructor here? Now, this is the instructor with his organization.
Right.
But because of my hands-on knowledge,
Experience.
skills, and abilities, attitudes, I like to interchange abilities with attitudes, because when you get underwater, it's more attitude than ability.
Right. Yeah,
And-
it's the
and
mindset
so
that you got to go into it with.
It's knowledge, skills, and attitude for a good public safety or special response diver.
Now, Zinder, he kind of got this more, I guess, burdened to share this information after an incident that happened with the fire department, where they had gone into a Jeep had driven into the water with a mom, a dad, and a little girl. And correct me if I'm
Sean O'Dare.
missing anything. Sean O'Dare was the guy that
He
died
was the firefighter who drowned.
because they were only skin divers, so they were just snorkelers,
Right.
pretty much. And they jump in. They got the mom and dad out. They couldn't find the girl, and it was at night. And so people are jumping in, but there was no, like in the rescue side, there was no protocol to how many people are in the water, how buddy system or anything like that.
Well, there was a protocol, but it was a very loosely knit one. You don't go in the water, even in protocols today.
Sure.
You don't go in the water without the scene supervisor knowing you're going in the water.
Right.
You don't go in the water when other people are already in the water,
Right.
because that's a kind of a scary thing too, when you're groping along the bottom looking for a body and then a hand grabs you.
Which we have that in training, which is very fun to watch as an instructor.
It's just, I mean, oh, what was that?
But he went under. He jumped in and nobody knew he was there.
Nobody knew he was in the water,
And he drowned because he got caught underneath the Jeep canopy had come off.
which had come off and separated on the bottom.
And he got under there and panicked.
When he
and-
ran out of air, he was trying to come up, and he's coming up into this canopy, and he ended up drowning.
Okay.
And I remember Zender and I were the ones responding.
Right.
Anytime fire rescue goes on a dive call, we are always sent.
Right.
So that when the rescue is no longer a rescue,
Then you can do the recovery.
it transfers to recovery, which is the first 30 minutes.
Sure.
And so they found the girl, but all of a sudden everybody's out of the water and Sean O'Dare is not around. Now they're going back in the water, and Zender arrives on the scene. And so he's suiting up to go in when they find him. His legs, just the end of his legs were sticking out under the canopy.
Right.
And they found him, and they started pumping on him and doing everything. You know, he passed away. But I remember getting there just a couple minutes after that, and I've never seen Zender so distraught. I mean, he's sitting in the back of his truck. And see, what's the matter? He says, "This thing should have never happened. This should have never happened. If there was proper training, this thing would have never happened."
Right.
And that was sort of the impetus of what Zender says. We need to start training. We started inviting other police dive teams to come down to the Miami-Dade Police Department and train for the 2-week police diver course that the state of Florida had. And it became very, very successful. And Z was the seed there. I was the instructor. And we just carried it from 1988, but we were actually doing public safety diving since I came on in 81, and he was doing it since 1958. The first police dive training that was done in-house with all in-house information and everything, an in-house trainer and everything, was in 1961, May of 1961. The first 5 or 6 students graduated from that class.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there you have kind of a foothold.
That was the first in-house police diver training.
Right.
Okay. Because in
Before that,
1959...
In 1958, 1959, the Connecticut State
Right.
Police sent 6 volunteers to Groton, Connecticut, very convenient,
Right.
to the U.S. Navy diving school.
And they weren't doing any kind of public safety training. They were just becoming U.S. Navy divers.
U.S. Navy trained divers, yeah.
And then they were going and adapting it to their own stuff.
That's correct.
But the courses, the actual, hey, we've done it, we've experienced it, I can tell you about a body, a gun, a car, like the real world of public safety diving was in Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing to knowledge and skills.
Yeah.
Because knowledge and skills is, I've experienced it, and it didn't work this way.
Right.
Or someone told me you do it this way, and it didn't work because they never told me that this was a problem when you get underwater.
Right. Yeah, they can talk about it from the surface, but underwater it's a whole nother
And
animal.
Zender was able to, put together, well, here's what happens when you have to go up against a car that's been in a traffic accident. You got to check to see whether there's people in the car. You got to check whether people got out of the car and drowned. You got to check. I mean, there's so much that you have to do, and that's the difference.
So Zender comes, when did he come off of the team?
He 93, I think, 91, 93.
Okay. And you took over as the senior diver during that time.
I became the senior diver at the time.
Okay.
No, I wasn't the senior diver. I was a senior, skilled, knowledgeable
you were
teacher
the
diver.
senior experienced diver, not senior in
That's
time
correct.
or age.
Yeah, we had Joe Johnson was still on the dive team.
Okay.
And Howard Rachel, and he was on both of them had 10, 15 years on the dive team.
Now you have your time kind of taking over from there. You're a naturally curious person when it comes to the underwater world. You're always learning, and I can see that that's a direct result from the way that Zender was, and just saying, let's find out more. Why does this thing? You just ask the question why all the time. And
Zender basically gave me that at first. He says, you're looking for a gun. He says, all right, first of all, who threw the gun? Why is the gun in there? How? Who? What? Where?
It's
when?
not
Why?
just
And
jumping
how.
in the water and hey, there's a gun. We got to find it.
Basic
Let's ask
detective
some
work.
Right.
Get the person that threw the gun to the scene. Don't use secondhand information. Well, the detective said, no.
Right.
Get the person. Now, usually, people that's involved in homicides and things, they lawyer up, and their lawyer ain't going to let them come out. But a lot of times before that lawyering up, you can actually get the subject to come out to the scene if he's willing to do something, and you give him a gun
And let him throw it.
You say, throw it where you threw it from, the same way you threw it, and
see what
they're
happens.
out there and they go there. Now what you've got is a fixed point from which to search.
Correct.
But if you find the gun, whoa, kudos. Well, some people may say, well, you saw it get thrown in. He says, yeah, but it's underwater.
Right.
You don't have the same landmarks and
Correct.
everything. You've got to do a search to find the gun. And if you find the gun, that means you've done a thorough
Effective
search.
search. Correct.
Therefore, anything else you searched, the other gun wasn't there, so you got to expand
Right.
your search area.
And that's kind of that just goes to the examples that Zender created, and you've created, even expounded on that, is that it moves beyond just the water. And I think that's where a lot of dive teams miss, is when they're getting started. They're just thinking water, 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 water. There's so much that happens. Your time underwater is minimal to the time you spend prepping, moving to, getting away from, asking questions. You spend way more time on the surface as a diver than you do underwater.
Absolutely.
And so there's so much more that goes into it, but people just get to this, I'm only effective underwater. And I know that that's just from my experience and seeing other people that have been trained and come through our courses. They've also said that, there's just, people only want to focus on the water part, but they don't help me mentally prepare for everything else.
That's
and
correct.
that's where I know that kind of legacy has been passed down from Zender to you, from you to me over the years. And
yeah, you're a third generation.
Zender's my grandfather, public safety diving grandfather. I learned from you in 2004.
Okay.
2005, and then was doing training with you and more advanced training, and but
with that little bit of information you got in the training, you did the same thing I did. You have expanded that further by actually being in the water, doing it, and accomplishing the mission.
And I will say that what I did learn in that first, it was 1 week, it was 5 days of training. What I learned there equipped me so well, and I said this in actually the last episode on this podcast, talk about my time doing my first murder investigation. I was 17 years old, learning how to do all this, and I became a special response diver. And then, like a few weeks later, I'm on my first murder investigation in Texas, and I didn't feel ill-equipped. I went through the training, and I feel so equipped because I did in-water experience too. It wasn't all theoretical. It was actually getting in the water. We found cars and other stuff during training. So that was a big, I know is a big deal that Zender wanted, that you've wanted, now I want, is just get people in the water and do it, so that when they go out there or when you're not around, they're going, oh, I know what I'm doing.
And teach them what works.
Right.
Zender never claimed to be the know-all, see-all, do-all.
Right.
He would even say, if you find a better way to do this, by all means do it. But these things work.
Right.
And have worked for 50
Which
years.
has been your platform all the time. Hey, I don't know the only way. I'm from the South, so we have the saying, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. I've learned that my whole life. But you've lived it by saying, we just know that these search patterns work, and they work every time. If you have a better way to do it, great. If you have technology that you can use, great. But we know that this basic, fundamental truth never goes away. And I think that's been one of the staples of what SRDI has done over the years, but also kind of what you've taught that in every aspect of your life. You're like, here's the fundamental truths of things that just, this is the reality. And when you can take that on a dive team and just say, hey, we're gonna keep this the main thing, and anything else we get only assists us, whether it's side scan sonar, a special boat, new vehicles, cool gear, all those things are nice.
But you still got to put the diver in the water.
You still got to put the diver in the water.
Still got to put the boots on the ground.
And so that's I think where, and anybody who's listening, that's just maybe your takeaway from this is that throughout the history of public safety diving, all the way back to 1958, it has been that you still got to go into the water and do the thing. That's really what it comes down to. And speaking of doing the thing, I just want to kind of let people know your experience in the world of public safety, in the world of police diving. Your resume isn't too shabby either. You were on the police department for 33 years.
Yes.
With Miami-Dade Police Department.
Correct. Started with the public safety department.
Right. And then that just shows you how long
Then
you
it
were
became
there.
the Metro-Dade Police
Exactly.
Department, then the Miami-Dade Police Department.
But 25 of those years, you were on the dive team.
That's correct.
And you were, I'm just looking down the list here. You have over 7,500 vehicle recoveries, 1,800 body recoveries, over 750 weapons recoveries. You've recovered planes, helicopters, earth movers, missile guidance systems, which is probably another story for another time, hundreds of pounds of drugs smuggled into Miami through the port, cocaine cowboy days. And you've, amongst all of that experience, you have worked with and trained FBI, DEA, Customs, National Park Service, U.S. Secret Service, every branch of the military, Special Forces, FAA, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, NTSB. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And that's just goes to what's cool for me to see is the legacy that Zinder created and left with you and what you carried that onto. Because I can't imagine him just even thinking it's possible to see what you have accomplished with your own experience. And now that's getting directly translated through this organization. At first it was the National Academy of Police Diving, and then we became Special Response Diving International. That's directly being put out into the world and helping law enforcement and first responders through even EMS services, fire departments, parks and recs departments. Whoever is in need of this training, those individuals are directly influenced by you and myself, but coming from the father of police diving.
That's correct.
And I think that's one of the coolest things for me to be a part of this legacy is that, you're not hearing from like some instructor that's been I paid to do the course. No, these are people who are direct descendants in a way of the father of police diving who created this, really started this whole thing. And it's worked since 1958 and keeps working.
And it keeps on working. I can't think of anybody that's ever come through our training that has not gone away with an understanding like 10 times more than what they had. And they were already police divers or fire divers or something like that.
We have a firefighter that we trained from West Palm Beach who said, I learned more in 2 hours in a canal with you guys than I did in my entire 3-day public safety diving course that I did with my department. And he did this on his own because he knew he needed another level of training. He just like, I'm missing something. I don't feel confident in the water. I don't feel like search patterns are working. And it was. And it's because we just go back to the basics. And it sounds a little elementary and simplistic, but at the end of the day, we close cases, we find things. It's just the reality.
You got to be in the water. You got to be searching. You got to know how to search methodically. Everybody that has been through our training, there's basically 7 basic search patterns. And we train them those, and then they come up later had this one guy from Mississippi. We call him Mississippi Mud Skipper.
Nice.
They were always in the Mississippi River
Yeah.
doing searches. And he wanted to take one of the search patterns that we had and expand on it and have it be one that's trained in the course. And he described it, and I'm like, no, this isn't something that we really want to do. He wanted to separate two divers on a search line by over 100 feet at some point.
In the Mississippi River.
In the Mississippi River. I says, you lose your control of safety. I mean, it's always reference and control.
Right.
That line on the bottom is your reference, but what is the control? That's where you're able to be together knowing there's your partner. Diving fatalities in public safety diving is a scary thing, which should not happen.
Right.
Should not happen. And it's a shame that it still happens. And because of that, I'm just more and more emboldened to be able to say, hey, here's what you got to do and here's how you got to be trained.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I want to thank you for just taking some time to come and share some of the history with us and where all this got started, all the contributions and commitment and you know the research and evolution that has been a result of Zender to come down and then to you, and then you take it, you know, leaps and bounds further than where he thought it could
Hopefully
be.
you're going to carry it for the torch.
Well, that's the goal, but
always remember, it started with a Z.
Started with a Z. Well, Michael, thank you again for coming on the podcast. Looking forward to some future conversations with you and being able to benefit our public safety dive community. And I know everybody will be better for hearing from you and what you have to share.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Hey, this is Jordan Harvell with the Special Response Diver Podcast. I want to thank you so much for listening and being a part of this community. This is what it's all about. We're trying to have the conversation around the real world work that we're doing as public safety divers, and that's you. If you're listening to this and you've had some kind of benefit from it, I'd love for you to help us out and share that with those that are also in the community. Other people that are in a police department or fire department, military dive team, just send this out to them, and you can hit the like button, hit the share, send that out. And what would really be awesome is if you could leave us a review or a rating in wherever you are consuming this content. Again, this is what it's all about. It's to be able to help public safety divers learn more and be better in the tough job that they already have. So your help in getting this out to more people is extremely important, but it's also a great help to us to be able to have more of an impact in those that need it. Well, again, I want to thank you for listening to the Special Response Diver Podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode.